Next on the Delaware Way, a former Eagle Scout turned senator speaks out about a new law that bans marriage for certain people. Plus, Delaware's new brand that's homegrown and healthy. The Delaware Way is just ahead. Welcome to the Delaware Way. Dawn Stensland-Mendte in for Larry today, my better half. Let's get right to our first issue, which is the first state making a first in America. We're talking about marriage laws and who can get married. And we want to welcome to the Delaware Way Senator Anthony Delcollo of the 7th District. Hello, Senator.
Hey, great to be here.
Yeah, so take me through this because everybody's talking about it. In fact, you've made international news with a law that you really believe in.
Yes. I have to say, before I get into that, I do want to thank my colleague who worked on this with me, who actually authored the measure, Representative Kim Williams. She's a Democrat who overlaps in part with my Senate district. I was honored to serve as the prime sponsor in the Senate for this measure. The reason I believe in the bill that you're referencing, which is a red line ban on marriage for individuals below the age of 18 for any sort of child marriage, is for a couple of reasons. One, we've seen awful stories of our immigration laws being abused in conjunction with permissive, I guess, regulations around marriage in other jurisdictions where they're engaging in human trafficking. We had a very backwards and I thought atrocious exception in our law, which said that things which would otherwise be termed statutory rape would have an exception if the minor was married. And I thought that that was just beyond backwards and needed to be eradicated from our law. And realistically, when you look at it from a broad perspective of what a person might miss out on if they simply wait, you know, this is a momentous occasion for most people, for all people, when they decide, I'm going to get married. And so because Delaware law says that a person under the age of 18, for all other circumstances, is not of capacity, they don't actually have the capacity to engage in a contract, to hire an attorney, to buy a house, to buy a car, to do any of those things, why would we then say, well, we're going to substitute somebody else's capacity for such a momentous decision?
But a lot of people might say, well, wait a minute, who are you to decide if for religious purposes our family gives their blessing? Or what if, not that my parents were after 55 years of marriage, but what if they have a pregnancy and they say, well, look, we're 17, but we want to get married and do the right thing. You say what?
So as to the first question, because I think they're two separate concepts. The first question, which has to do with religious freedom, the bill doesn't speak to any type of religious ceremony. It says merely that if you want a marriage license issued, which is a formal legal recognition by the state of Delaware, which has a significant number of consequences. So we're not interfering with a religious ceremony, and that was a point that came up multiple times during the discussion about this issue. And I can say, as a person who believes in religious freedom, if it were to impinge upon religious freedom, I would not be in support of the measure. The other item that you brought up, which I thought is significant and I have some sympathy towards, is the notion of an underage pregnancy. And from what I have seen in terms of all the data and all the information, if you're basically saying, well, I'm going to get married because I'm pregnant, or I'm going to marry someone because I impregnated them, then that should not be the sole consideration. And what would a person lose by pausing for just a little while until they're 18? I would say they lose very little.
So in other words, if somebody, for religious reasons, if they were 17 or what have you, they could, in their church, synagogue, mosque, whatever, they could have a religious ceremony and still get married through their religion, but they would have to wait to get that legal marriage license.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
So to you, and I'm sure being interviewed, you know, in an international way, you must have met with some interesting perspectives. Do you think that in America we have a different perspective on children and protecting childhood and really cherishing that as something precious? I mean, we see child labor in other, you know, places in the world.
And I can say with respect to that, I think we have a very good balance of allowing young people to learn, to develop into persons so that they can exercise agency over their future. And I think that's an important component of what makes America America. So if you're going to expect for us to have a well-informed electorate that's going to be involved, you have to have the space and the ability to support someone so they can develop that autonomy. I would rather have well-informed 18-year-olds who have gone through the process and had that experience and have had the chance to grow, being involved in making the decisions that impact all of us with that sort of support as contemplated. And you know, there are a broad variety of cultures, and many of them are beautiful across this big wide world of ours, but I tend to think that there's certainly some reason why I believe America is the greatest country in the world. And I think Delaware is leading that charge because we do have robust protections around child labor laws and around child abuse laws and the types of things that we try to do to, I think, give credence to this very American idea of protecting people who are innocent and standing up for those who can't stand up for themselves. And when you look at the two ends of the spectrum in a person's life, you've got very, very elderly folks who may occasionally need some help, and then you've got very young folks. And I think it's just a part of who we are, how we're wired, that sort of anti-bully ethos that I think many Americans have, that I believe this bill is perfectly aligned with that idea.
Do you think, I mean, what motivated you the most toward this, you and Kim Williams? I mean, was this really the human trafficking that happens or the pedophilia that happens, or was there one particular incident that you just thought we have to do something here?
So I have to mention the folks who worked with us on this measure, which was a nonprofit called Unchained at Last. And I would recommend that everybody look them up. Unchained at Last is a great nonprofit. They brought a lot of the very visceral human element to the fact that they help folks who have been involved in forced marriage situations where they've essentially been forced by parents or guardians, either from the threat of deportation, with that as the stick, if you will, to compel a marriage, or with the overall just burden of saying we're going to press down on a minor and force someone with the compelling ability that folks who are in a position of authority can have to engage in that sort of behavior. So that was really significant. And looking at the stories of those people who have actually gone through this in the United States, it impacted me. And then when you combine that with the research I did about our own laws and the fact that some of that anachronistic thinking, some of that enabling of that type of monstrosity appeared to me to be reflected in our very law, wherein if you're over 29, to marry a 16-year-old or a 17-year-old would be considered, or if you're not married and you were to engage in, sexual intercourse with somebody and to have that differential would be considered statutory rape if it's from anywhere more than 29 and you're marrying someone 16 or 17. But if you're married, then that's not considered statutory rape anymore. Right. And I thought that really just got to me.
Senator Delcollo, do you have a minute to stick around?
I do.
We have several other issues: gambling, the budget, whether or not we have a budget crisis this year. The Delaware Way continues.